At each of our masses this weekend, some teens, young adults, and adults who are exploring the possibility of this Catholic faith will come before us. We will promise to support them, we'll mark them with the sign of the cross, we'll pray for them. It's wonderful. There's like 25 or 30 people doing that here. It just speaks beautifully of the vitality here and of the grace of God active through so many people. So pray for them, right? After the homily, we're also going to stand up our confirmation kids, those who are preparing for that sacrament, their parents and sponsors, to pray for them. I really hope that these young kids, right, watching these older people choose to become Catholic, will stir something in them that they might choose it more intentionally for their lives as well. We'll pray for them also. As Thanksgiving approaches, I hope that you find much for which to be thankful. It's also okay to sometimes give thanks through tears if there's an empty place, a table, or some other heartache. The blessings of Thanksgiving don't take away that pain, and that sadness doesn't take away how much we have for which to be thankful. So just know of our love. Blessings to you and to your family. This weekend we celebrate a feast about Christ as King. Our gospel question will be what images surface in you when you hear the word King? What does that conjure up for you? Thanks for joining. When you think of the term King, what images come to mind to you, really? I think many tend to think of things like wealth, castles, royal clothing. I think especially many get some sense that the king is synonymous with power, right? You know that sense. To war for the sake of our cause, because we are the righteous ones, we will slay our wicked enemies. The king is the one who has that power, right? Today is a feast of Christ the King. To think that Jesus is such a king is to not know Jesus at all. And if we're not really careful, we can get a lot wrong about God, who God is. Now, the title of today's feast could be one of those times. You see, we tend to like power so much that we think God must really like that as well. We need to know this about our King. The God we call all-powerful has chosen a certain level of powerlessness before us, right? It's true. We don't tend to think that way, but it's true. The God we call all-powerful has chosen a level of powerlessness before us. God will never force us in any way. We tend to think, or be tempted to think at least, that God's highest attribute might be power. It's not. God's highest attribute is love. Power can change things externally, but only love can transform. I'll say that again. Power can change things externally, but only love can transform. And that's why the scriptures chosen for us today for this feast ask us to look at our King right there on the cross. As Jesus hung there, they thrust a lance into his side. This Jesus who chose to never himself fight that way, absorbed the hate, and through it all remained loving and true. Though God is always calling us and empowering us to live our days with kindness, to act with justice for the orphans, the immigrant, the widow, to love humbly and generously in the short time we have on earth, God will never force us to live in a certain way. Instead of force, God chooses to invite. I would love to walk through your days with you. Would you let me be a part of this day with you? My way of being, my values give life and meaning. Will you choose to try to love as I did? At school, in your friendships, at work, in this world. And could you start again today? God wants us to want God. God wants us to be loving and to embrace the ways of Jesus, but God will never force us in any way. That is the kind of king we have. Let me add this just one more element to what I'm saying. There is also in each of us what I call, or many call, a certain level of warrior energy. Warrior energy is what allows us to take a stand for what is right. To remember that there is truth that needs to be proclaimed, evil that needs to be resisted. Boundaries to protect ourselves and others need to be set, right? We have to be willing to stand up against injustice and to do the hard work of creating a more just world, a more loving world. But it takes great wisdom and spirituality, depth of spirituality, to not become bitter, or hurtful, or mean as we do so. To not become the evil we say we hate. Jesus knows the profound truth. You cannot do away with evil by more evil. We cannot end violence by using more violence. The only way to break the chain is to absorb the pain within, to find that place of mercy, the very grace of God in us, to go to that place where we are both ourselves and more than ourselves. And this is especially true when we are hurt or mistreated. And we all get hurt or mistreated at some point along the way. And then what? The first thing, of course, is to become aware of that, right? Name it. And then there's that crucial moment to breathe in for a second and to decide, now what, right? Can we try to remember right then in those moments that God is right there with us, that God gets us, that God understands, that Jesus cares, right? And can we remind ourselves, to trust that there is some goodness in that other person. We don't know their story or what they've suffered, but to go to that place inside of ourselves of goodness, right? To the grace to not seek revenge or cause pain or harm. It's the only way to stand in the face of evil without becoming evil ourselves. Many years ago, I saw this striking interaction in a grocery store. This young boy, probably on the high end of the autism spectrum, was sitting in an aisle, just kind of pulling things off and stacking them up in the aisle. The clerk was irritated, said, "Put that stuff back." Now the young boy looks up and then just goes right back to pulling out more things and stacking them on top of each other. Now he's even more irritated, and the clerk kind of yells at him, "Stop doing that." Now the boy's older sister had come around the corner right then and saw that interaction, could tell her brother was agitated and didn't get this. So she sits down next to her little brother. She puts her arm around him and said something to him I couldn't understand. I couldn't hear it. And then the two of them start putting stuff back on the shelf. Afterwards, she walks up to this clerk, and I will never forget this. She says to him firmly and clearly, "You have to love it into him. You have to love it into him." That is how our King has chosen to relate to us. Yes, when we think of kings, we might think of wealth, castles, royal clothing. I do think we tend to think of power. But our King has chosen the humbler path, the path of love, and awaits our response.